If I had $1 for every time I found that a specific symbol that I'd spent hours and hours developing for isn't available on MetaTrader 5, wow, I'd probably be rich and retired right now. I eventually got so frustrated with this problem that I created a solution just for you, and it's really straightforward for you to use. So in this episode, I'm going to show you how to do it, and in the next 7 minutes, I'm going to completely change your perspective on this. So let's check it out. Did you know that literally every single MetaTrader with every single broker has a different set of symbols that they trade? If that's you and you're building a trading bot, you're probably wondering, well, how on earth do I capture all of this information? And I'm glad that you asked, because in this episode, I'm going to show you how to get all of the symbols that your MetaTrader 5 is using. Now, of course, you're probably going to capture the big ones, the things like the USD JPY and the, USD Oz, those kind of things. But what you might be interested in is some of the more niche aspects of what's available. In this episode, I show you how to set up your MetaTrader 5 so that you get the symbols that you can trade, meaning that you always know exactly what you're able to trade on. Best of all, we fully integrate this into our user experience using the Streamlit app that I showed on the previous episode. You'll love it, and it's really going to help you level up as we start to build out this amazing trading bot that we've gotten started on. There's a couple of things you need in order to get the most out of this episode. Firstly, I really recommend that you go through some of my previous episodes just in terms of understanding how to start MetaTrader 5, how to set it up for trading, and how to start your user interface. Now, you're absolutely welcome to just dive in wherever it works for you. This is fully open source code, but having those episodes will just really give you the context that will really help you finish this episode. So over to you. Secondly, having a working MetaTrader 5 is actually really, really critical for this episode. The reason for that is the symbols that you're going to retrieve are specific to your MetaTrader 5 and your broker. You could have the same MetaTrader 5 and a different broker have a different list of symbols that you could trade. So getting that right is actually really critical. If you're not sure about which broker to use, then check out some of the things that are on the internet about it. I don't recommend brokers, and I won't provide any recommendations around that. Just make sure that it works for you and it's available in your jurisdiction. With all of that said, let's get on into the code. Here's what this is going to look like by the time you finish this episode. So if you've been following the series, you would know we go through, we can choose to load our settings from our settings file, and we've been working on implementing a trading platform. So we're going to do MetaTrader 5. Now, what's going to happen is when we do this, you can see here, I'll just move this facer out the way. What we're going to be able to do is to pull up all of the symbols that your MetaTrader 5 currently offers. Now, what's powerful about this is that MetaTrader 5 actually offers lots of different symbols to different people in different parts of the world. It's all dependent on what broker you're using. So in a lot of cases, what's available on my MetaTrader 5 might not actually be available on your MetaTrader 5. And using this really simple method that we're about to implement in code, you can totally see it. So this will be really, really powerful for you. Here's how we go about doing that. If you go back to the user interface code that I showed on a previous episode, you'll know that we implemented some options around implementing what trading platform we chose. And here we chose the MetaTrader 5 trading platform. You can definitely check out that episode if you want to see the structure of how this user interface works. But for now, I'm just going to dive straight into how we get all of those symbols. After we choose MetaTrader 5, then we go through the code that starts it up. And if it's successful, we originally started by just notifying the user that MetaTrader 5 started successfully, which is pretty helpful. The next thing we actually want to be able to do is to retrieve our MetaTrader 5 symbols and then show them on the user interface. So here's what that code looks like from the user interface perspective. We start by calling our symbols file, then we call this helper functions.getSymbols from MetaTrader 5, and I'll show you what that helper function does in a minute. And then we populate our symbols drop down. So here we have our Copilot container.select box with a title of symbol. We pass it the symbols that we just retrieved from here. No index, no key. We don't want a help function. We don't want to do anything on change at this point in time, and no arguments or keyword arguments. So this helper functions thing is up here. Now, if you're just at the start of this series, you won't have created the helper functions file just yet. So if you want to go ahead and do that, I'll show you on mine what that looks like. So you just right click and you click new file and call helper functions. I won't do that because I've already got it here, but that's how you go about doing it. Okay, so let's go into the helper functions, and we're going to add our first function to it. Previously, you would have created the MetaTrader 5 interface, and we'll be filling out that with a little bit more code in this episode as well. But for now, just import it straight into your file, which is import MetaTrader 5 _ interface. Then we're going to create a function which is get symbols. Now this function is pretty straightforward, and to be honest, if you're just using MetaTrader 5, you might feel that it's a little bit arbitrary. I mean, you're kind of calling the same thing twice. But where this gets powerful is when we start implementing other trading platforms like Binance or Coinbase or Alpaca Markets or any of the other ones that I'll be showing you throughout this series. This becomes really helpful. So this allows us to simply basically branch depending on what platform we're using, and if you're using that platform and you just decide to use this the Tradoxy terminal on a completely different platform, it's super simple for you to update, which is really helpful. So here we go, platform, we're going to pass it a string, and that's going to return a list of symbols. Got our comments in here, and I love adding comments to my code. It really helps whenever you're trying to debug stuff, which happens a lot when you're developing, let's be honest. Okay, and then we're just going to add in a really simple if-else statement. Now here, what I'm doing here is, if the platform is equal to MetaTrader 5, we're going to go ahead to the MetaTrader 5 interface and call the function getMySymbols. This else statement is really important. What this basically says is, if someone passes, or if you pass it a string that it doesn't recognize, it's going to raise an error. Now that might be annoying because it might break your terminal, but what is really powerful about doing is going to stop any other issues that you might experience, like trades getting made that shouldn't be getting made and all those kind of things. So this is a really helpful thing, and it's just a good programming practice to get into, to always be adding in those try and except statements. It catches errors for you and really helps you with your debugging. So here we go. So we go ahead and get the symbols from MetaTrader 5. We retrieve them in this line, and then we return all of those symbols. Now if you go back to this app.py, that's where those symbols come from, and then those symbols get populated in there. Super cool. Okay, so how do we actually retrieve these symbols from MetaTrader 5? Well, I'm glad that you asked. Here's how we do that. Here's the function getMySymbols. Now all this function is going to do is query your MetaTrader with your broker and get a list of the symbols that your broker on your MetaTrader offers. And like I said, that actually may be different from what I get, which is why this is really helpful and useful. Okay, so we go ahead and first of all we use our try and except statement to query MetaTrader 5 to get the symbols. Now it's important to recognize here that this means that the MetaTrader 5 terminal must be started. If it's not, this will just return an error. It'll tell you that that's why it hasn't started, but that's why we actually use our branching logic within the user interface to make sure that we've started MetaTrader 5 first, because if you don't, it just doesn't work. Once we've retrieved the symbols, they come in as a specific type of object, and we actually need to iterate through that object and retrieve the name value of those symbols. Now, if you want to retrieve something else that you feel is more useful for you, you can absolutely choose the different properties, any of the different properties that are here. All that they need to be is a string or a number, something that can easily go into a list. Finally, once this all symbols list is complete, and this happens really fast, so don't be worried about speed, you won't even notice it really. It returns all of those symbols. So how does this work? All symbols is returned to our helper function, which fills in symbols, and then that goes back to our app.py. And I'm sure that you can probably see that from this helper function I could have a Alpaca Markets interface, I could have a Binance interface, I could have a Coinbase interface, I could have any interface that has a REST API, and I could just fill it out. It would all just flow straight back up into your app.py. So you put a bit of work in now, comes out with something amazing at the end. How good is that?